as I have one of the great makers of road movies here, I thought we could kind of think of this talk as a little bit of a roadmap through your work, through your life and career leading up to this point. Of course, we only have an hour, so we won't be able to make every stop along the way. But I did want to start by asking you a little bit about how you came to filmmaking, because I know that you had some sort of alternate lives along the way, including working as a film critic, as an engraver, studying philosophy. Even though you had made films very young, it seems to have taken you a while to sort of come around to it as a career.
Well, I made Super 8 movies when I was a kid. And I was a projectionist at the age of 6. I had inherited my father's 9.5 millimeter film, and it had miraculously survived the war in a basement, together with a little box of about a dozen tiny little film spools, 1 2-minute reels, all sorts of stuff, silence, Laurel Hardy, Buster Keaton, tiny little movies, just one scene. And that was the time before television in Germany, and I was very popular among all my friends because I was the only one able to project movies. Nobody had ever seen any before, and I could do them backwards, which was of course the greatest attraction because nobody had ever seen food come out of people's hands. So I showed these 12 movies about 100 times. That was my beginning, and then I forgot about movies. And I did everything that you called it, and ended up at the age of 21 or 22 in Paris, determined to become a painter, and that's what you have to do when you're going to be a painter and you're very young, you need to be a painter. I figured. But it turned out that I got totally sidetracked in Paris by the Cinematheque, and they were the only warm place I could afford. The movie costed the equivalent of 25 cents. And if you stayed in between the shows on the toilet, you could, with 25 cents, see 5 movies. So I saw around 1,000 films in a row. A crash course of literature and another night visit.
What were some of the films that you saw during that time that really made an impression on you?
The most important thing, well, there was a Fred Lang retrospective, and I had never seen these films he had made in Germany, because in Germany, when I grew up, there was nothing like that. But the key thing was a retrospective by Anthony Mann, and I saw each and every film made by Anthony Mann, and it is studying these films and watching these films that I realized that there were authors behind the movies, and it was a language, and that you could actually you could understand how movies are made. I saw that and understood that in the Westerns by Anthony Mann, and that was a key experience for me.
Did you also have a chance to see Ozu in the Cinematheque?
No, none. That came much later. That came 10 years later.
And in terms of the formation of your own sort of aesthetic sensibility as a filmmaker, it seems remarkably fully formed in a way already in your student feature, Summer in the City. And I'm curious if you can talk particularly about the sort of sense of time in your films. And in Summer in the City, you know, we have a real sense of sort of seeing entire events happen in real time, and there's a kind of a hypnotic quality to it, a meditative quality.
Well, you can call it that from today's perspective, a meditative quality. The truth was I didn't know how to say cut. I felt once the camera was running that was something holy was happening, and you couldn't just possibly stop it. And the actors sometimes knew what they were doing. They had a little dialogue and they had a little scene. But when that was over, I thought the most exciting thing was beginning, because then what they were doing then, that really counted for me, because that was life. And sometimes they just went on until the film ran out. And that's why the film became so long. It was 2.5 hours long. I just couldn't cut. I couldn't possibly interrupt something that could go on and show me something that I didn't know and hadn't foreseen. And so the film is partly written, partly improvisational, and has some very long takes, and unending takes. Whatever was in the camera, I had to run out and then the scene was over. So you call it meditative, now I call it clumsiness.
But I think that even in many later films of yours, there's a sense of kind of an expansive sense of time, of letting the camera linger, letting a lot happen before we cut, before we move on to the next thing.
Yeah, I always felt that the unforeseen was the most exciting thing, and I encouraged my actors to continue and not wait for me to say cut. And we made entire fictional movies without a script. Kings of the Road or Alice in the Cities. After the first week, nobody looked into the script anymore, and we just went from day to day. So, and I felt much more comfortable than having to fulfill something that was written before, that I conceived before on the typewriter. When the camera was rolling, it was so exciting that it had not been conceived before. So that is something that has been more or less present in all my filmmaking, the encouraging the actors to find something on their own in a scene or after a scene or through the scene that we could not possibly write. But then, of course, I also learned to make movies that were strictly written and built before. But I always figured the documentary aspect in fiction, but the very fact that there were clouds moving and birds flying through the shot and cars moving that you didn't have any control of. So things happened, and the sun came out in the middle of the shot, it went away. I always thought this was as important as the so-called plot. So I always liked you call it documentary elements of any shoot. I mean, every shoot has a certain, unless you're just in front of a green screen and stuff, but if you're outdoors and if you shoot any fictional scene, there's always a certain amount of life coming into it that you can't control, and I was always much attracted by that.
Can you take us a little bit through your I don't know if it parallels exactly your discovery of cinema, but your discovery of American and British pop music, which certainly plays a role from pretty early on in your film career, and I think you know, often the soundtracks of your films are sort of striking on the audience as the images and the dialogue, and they play a bigger role, I think, than they do in a lot of films.
Yeah, this first film, Some in the City, was already called after a Loving Spoonful song. We shot the whole film in the winter. Really, the whole film was shot in November, in 2 weeks in November. But Some in the City had such a great sound, and in the winter you dream of the summer. So the whole film is dreaming itself somewhere anyway. And then the film was dedicated to the Kings. That's what it says under. And there's lots of songs by the Kings in the film. And that's why the film is basically not available anymore, because I put everything in I liked. There's Elvis and Chuck Berry, and there's a track by the Rolling Stones. So impossible to release the movie, because they never told us in film school that we had to acquire the rights to something. So I just use all the music I like. And I wonder how you get to know the film.
I have a bootleg.
Ah.
Anyone in the audience can come up to me afterwards.
Yeah, yes, you can, because
address.
Because not only bootlegging is illegal, but the movie is illegal in itself. We tried at some point to make an effort to see whether we could do something with it, but I only had the finished mix. The tracks were gone, so it's impossible to take any of the music out. And it was, we started and realized it was completely useless to acquire all the music that is in Some in the City, but of course about 100 times as much as the film itself.
Do songs sometimes give you ideas for stories or for images?
Oh yeah, a lot. And your question about the American and English music, I mean, blues especially, and what these kids that all were my age did with this country blues by electrifying it and by starting their bands called the Kings or the Pretty Things or Them or Rolling Stones or whatever they called these bands. And it was all based on the kind of music I liked, but now it was so much more exciting because these were guys my age who did it. And the fact that I eventually went to Paris because I thought I'm going to be a painter, it needed some courage, and the courage I got from that music because these kids made their bands and made their way, and I figured I had the right to do something as well. And I owe a lot to rock and roll in the course of my filmmaking career, in inspiration, yes. Alice in the City started with a song by Chuck Berry, Memphis, Tennessee, which is a story about a little girl.
The professional films that you made after Summer in the City coincided with what is referred to as the new German cinema, or German New Wave, including, of course, Fassbinder and Herzog. When you were making those films inside Germany, did you have this sense of a sort of Renaissance moment, and how close were you to your contemporaries at that time, and how much of a sharing of ideas or a sensibility do you feel that there was at that moment?
There was not much sharing of sensibility. We knew each other quite well, and we all started at about the same time, in the late 60s, early 70s. And we all very soon realized that filmmaking was difficult, and we didn't have much support. There was no industry that wanted us or acknowledged us. And we came from all sorts of backgrounds. I mean, not social backgrounds, but film backgrounds. Like Fassbinder was into melodramas, and he liked the movies with kind of circle a lot. Fassbinder was, and that was Werner Werner. Herzog owed a lot to German expressionism and Murnau and to himself after all. Mm-hmm. I was very much influenced by American cinema, and so we all had our own self-made movie backgrounds and our own idea of cinema, and all came upon the same obstacle that nobody wanted us, and that even if we succeeded in making a movie, nobody would distribute it, because Germany at the time, in terms of movies, was a total wasteland. And there was no independent distribution whatsoever. And all the distributors basically only showed either American movies or sort of horrifying German westerns shot in Yugoslavia, or soft porn or something, but nobody really needed us. So the fact that something like the new German cinema began and started is a quite amazing act of solidarity, because we realized everybody had its own boat, but we were in one big boat together, and that was sort of an economic necessity to stick together in order for each of these little boats to be able to float. So we formed our own production and then distribution company, and everybody was in it, and it worked for 10 years. And we all became who we became because of this act of solidarity, which didn't mean that stylistically or in terms of sensitivity, as you said, we had all that much in common, which certainly differentiated us, let's say, from the Nouvelle Vague in France, or the neorealism, or other sort of waves that had been before, where there was more of a context together. we didn't have much context together, and the invention, the term New German cinema was imposed by American critics. We were happy because finally we had something we could call ourselves.
Can you talk a little bit about your collaboration in those years and also after those years, but with the Austrian writer Peter Handke, particularly on Goli's Anxiety and Wrong Move, which, you know, to me are two of your great films from that period?
Peter is a couple of years older than me, and we got to know each other when I had just left school, high school. I got to know him at one of the first performances of his stage plays in Germany, and was involved in a discussion with him. And we met a little bit later in Düsseldorf, where he lived at the time, and went to see movies together and became friends. And when I left film school with Summer in the City as my final film of film school, Peter had just written a book that had become sort of a bestseller in Germany, The Goalie's Anxiety at the Penalty Kick. And he saw me, just finished film school and really without a chance to make a movie whatsoever. And none of my colleagues from film school made a movie for years. And because still the economy wasn't there. And Peter said, well, this book of mine had just worked so well. If you want to make a movie from it, take it. And he gave it to me, including the rights to make a movie. So I was the only one in my class of 18 who, a year later, after finishing film school, actually made a movie. The Goalie's Anxiety at a Penalty Kick. Wow, yeah. And the thing that brought me to New York for the very first time, I was at the new director's season in '71. With what I considered first film, Summer in the City, was a student film. It was a long student film, but The Goalie's Anxiety was my first film, and it brought me to New York, and I owe that completely to Peter. He wasn't much involved with it. He sort of told me where he had gone when he wrote the book and which landscapes and places he had visited, and then included in the film. So I chose those places, but he kept out of the script and only saw the finished film. But I owe him my first film, and a couple of years later, a few years later, we made another film together where he actually wrote the script, and that was Wrong Move. And a few years later, I produced his second film. He did 3 films as a director. I produced Left-Handed Women, which was a fantastic movie. I liked it a lot, but it's not really available anymore. So we worked together for a long time over the years, and he worked on Wings of Desire. So he's sort of my oldest, and we know each other for more than 40 years.
Tell me about coming to New York for the first time. Was that also your first time in the United States?
I had visited the United States countless times in movies. I felt I knew it, but of course, once I came to New York, I realized I didn't know shit. I remember I got a cold because it was, the new director season was, I think, in January or February, something. It was early in the year. And of course, I walked through New York all day long, and I always looked up in the air, and I stepped into every puddle and every dog shit. Because I just had to look up all the time. It was a fantastic experience. And the first 3 times I came to America, I never left New York. And only then afterwards I started to travel and realized the rest of the country was pretty different.
And talk a little bit about coming to America to work. In 1982, 2 films were released, made by you, very, very different films, but both made in America, Hammett and The State of Things. And talk a little bit about working in America and the sort of diametrically opposed projects that you did here when you first came.
Well, one film preceded it. That was in the cities where we shot at least the beginning in America. That was in the early 70s. And then I came in early '78, on an invitation by Francis Ford Coppola and his Zoetrope Studios to work on a film called Hammett, based on the real character of Dashiell Hammett, but on a fictional book. And of course, I mean, I was young. I was 33 years old, and being invited to make a film in America, of course, was too good to be true. And of course, I came. It was a long, amazing experience. Give it this friendly title. We worked for 4 years on the film. Went through 4 different writers, and altogether 40 versions of the script. And shot the film twice. Once we shot it on location, that was between in 79. And then we never finished that shoot because Francis had his mind on apocalypse and stuff. So I really made the film a little bit under the radar. And then it came to the last week of shooting, and I had to shoot only the big final scene, and I realized the scene was rewritten and it was not anymore like it had been in the script. Actually, it had not much to do anymore with the script, and there were characters they didn't even know. And they looked at it and said, "Why are you shooting it?" I said, "Yeah, well, that's the necessary ending for the film I've been making so far." And then I would stop it. And Francis suggested that I stop the shoot and edit the film, and then he would be able to understand my ending. And I didn't have a choice anyway. So that's what we did, and when I edited the film, half a year later, nobody liked it. At least the studio didn't like it. Francis sort of liked it, but he said, well, the studio thinks it's way too lyrical, and it's about the writer and not the detective story that we had given you. It was sort of a fictional story, because Hammett was a real Pinkerton detective. And the fictional story was, when he was still a detective, but was already starting to write, and the writing sort of, or the real detective work went into the writing, and the writing sort of overlaid the real detective work. So it was an interesting project, but they felt it was too much about the writer and not enough action, and too slow. So they figured they should rewrite the ending. And then the last writer came out and he rewrote the ending, and he liked his ending very much, and Francis liked it. But in order to make it work, he had to write more scenes in the front of the film to establish his ending, and he ended up writing a whole new story. And then Francis liked the story, and we decided to start shooting from this beginning again. And by then, none of the actors was left. And when we started to shoot the film one more time, 2 years later, from scratch, there was only the lead actor and me who were left. And 10% of my initial shoot made it, because there was some establishing shots in San Francisco and some white shots, and the rest of the film, the second shoot, was all done on studio. So 10% of the initial film made it. And there was great stuff in there. I mean, some amazing actors played the last part in there. Sylvia Sidney, that was the last role. She's no longer in the film. Woody Strode, who you might know from many different folk movies, played his last character. He's no longer in the film. None of it is in the film. Sam Fuller played a big part, not in the film. So all of these were cut out, and we started again, and that was a long process, as you can imagine, to make a film twice. I don't think it happened too often in the film history. And the other film
was that a kind of reaction in a way? Was the state of things?
The other thing was a movie I made in between when I was laid off, because I couldn't, when we finally had a new script, I couldn't shoot it because my lead actor, Fred Forrest, he was fat by then. He had been a skinny man for the shoot, and as we wanted to keep a few shots, we had to wait until he was skinny again, because he had been in Francis One from the Heart, and for some reason he had to gain weight. So when we wanted to start the film again, I looked at an actor who was twice the weight than before. So we realized we had to lay off. So I was laid off for a few months, and I made another movie in between. And that was State of Things, which is very much a film about filmmaking as such, and very much a film about the differences in a European and American approach. In the end, both the director and the producer die.
And somewhere in there, you also made what I think is a very beautiful, but tough at the same time, a film about Nicholas Ray near the end of his life, trying to finish a film, another movie about movie making. And you mentioned before your discovery of Anthony Mann at the Cinémathèque Française. Can you talk a little bit about your discovery and then your friendship with Nicholas Ray, and maybe also mention Sam Fuller, two other great B-movie directors who you used several times in your work.
In the movie The American Friend, which also played here at the New York Film Festival, there's a part played by Sam Fuller and a part played by Nicholas Ray. They both appear in the film, and I became good friends with both of them, and especially the part of that Nick played was very interesting. He played a character from another book by Patricia Highsmith. American Friend is based on Ripley's Game, novel by Patricia Highsmith, and I inserted another character from another novel, and that was a painter. Derwent was his name. A painter who was supposed to be dead was still alive because his paintings sold much better after his death. So he hadn't really died, but he continued working once he was dead, so to speak. And Dennis Hopper was his agent. Dennis sold the paintings of a dead painter with high profits. And so I became very good friends with Nicholas, and on behalf of American Friend, I was invited by Francis to come to America. So while we were preparing Hamlet, Nicholas Ray called me, and we met in between, and called me and said, I'm diagnosed with terminal cancer, and the one thing I'd really like to do is make another movie. And we developed this film that became Lightning Over Water, basically overnight, and started shooting 2 weeks later. And tried to make a fictional film out of a situation that was very real and that was taking over more or less our efforts to fictionalize it, and the film then became a film about Nick's death, which was something he wanted because his main desire was to correct the image he had in the American public as the drunk director who was kicked out of Hollywood. And I think he very courageously and really with an incredible effort really showed a different Nicholas Ray to one. I can't say to the American public because the film wasn't widely seen, but I think it fulfilled what Nicholas had in mind. And it became a film that was really, in the end, totally a documentary, because all our efforts to fictionalize it disappeared slowly more and more, and then it was just a film dictated by cancer.
I want to ask you about another collaboration with a writer who's played an important